Good evening. I'm Kathy Meyerly, a member of the League of Women Voters Rochester. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight, the candidates, our audience in person and online, and those of you who may be watching this later in time, to this forum that is sponsored by the League of Women Voters Rochester. We'd also like to thank the generous partners for tonight's forum, the Rochester Post-Bulletin, represented by Matt Stoley, the Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, the Rochester Public Library, for all their help. The League of Women Voters is a volunteer organization at the state, local, and national level that encourages citizens to participate in government. While we as the League do study and take positions on issues, we do not endorse parties or candidates. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates and not those of League of Women Voters Rochester or any partner or sponsor of this forum. And the sponsorship of the forum does not mean that we're endorsing any candidate. It's our purpose in providing this forum to give you an opportunity to hear the candidates discuss face-to-face issues that are important to you and our community. Tonight's questions have come from the League, the Post-Bulletin, the Chamber, our online community, and the members of our audience. For those of you here in the auditorium, just hold up the cards as you finish them, and a League volunteer will collect it and provide it to me. Questions that are unclear or hostile or personal in nature will not be used. And given our format tonight, the questions should relate to both candidates, and we would like them to be forward-thinking about current issues and not rehash topics that may have been discussed in the past. The cards become the property of the League of Women Voters of Rochester. As there's never enough time to cover all the issues in the time we have here, please feel free to contact the candidates' campaign headquarters or their websites, or visit with them after the forum tonight. We would like to thank all candidates for running for office, for offering to serve your community. We know this takes an enormous amount of time, dedication, and commitment, and we encourage our members as individuals and each of you in the audience to be involved in our community and the political activities of your choice. So tonight's forum is House District 25B in the Minnesota Legislature. Our candidates on the left are Andy Smith, and on the right, John Robinson. And each candidate will have 2 minutes to offer an opening statement. The candidates will then start responding to questions. Candidates have 75 seconds to answer each question, and then they will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. Candidates, please make your answers as succinct as possible. You don't have to use the entire time that you have allotted to you, but please finish the thought that you are speaking to when your time is up. We'd like to cover as many questions as possible. Each of you also have 3 30-second rebuttal cards. These can be used at any point during the question period, but you can only use 1 rebuttal card per question. And please put it in the middle when you're finished with it. Again, I'd like to remind the audience to remain quiet and hold your applause until the end of the forum, and turn off all of your electronic devices. Our timekeepers tonight, sitting up front here, are Jan Strand and Kathy Peters. Questions that are coming in are being screened by League of Women Voter Rochester members Amy Cockett and Dee Vodel. Asking questions tonight will be myself and Matt Stoley for the Post-Bulletin, and I will ask some questions from the Chamber of Commerce. They're unable to be here in person tonight. So we will begin with opening statements, and Candidate Smith, you would please go first.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'd like to start by saying thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Post-Bulletin, as well as the Chamber of Commerce. As a member of the Chamber of Commerce, I'm very happy that some of my dues goes to sponsoring these great events that encourage us to get involved in local politics, not just national politics or statewide politics. So thank you all for coming and being a part of that. My name is Andy Smith. I'm a small business owner. My wife, Anna, and I have labored happily to start 2 businesses in Rochester. We started Grey Duck Theater over on 6th Avenue Northwest, and also Garden Party Books, which is right next door, a used bookstore as well. And it's really the experience of starting those businesses that got me interested in being a part of politics, because as you get a member of a community and you put down your roots and you get involved and you hear from people, you excitedly get to be a part of their triumphs, which is wonderful, but you also get to hear about the pain that a community has. And that unique position as a business owner in the area of the arts and in businesses that focus on building community, not just selling things or making a profit, really hit home to me that we need to do better as a society to make a more just and equitable environment. Things like healthcare, affordable childcare, make sure everyone has a place to live and call home, that we prepare the environment for a future that is changing rapidly, and that we protect things like reproductive freedom to those who are in jeopardy of losing their own bodily autonomy. So sort of reluctantly but excitedly, I got in this race in 2020, and I would love if you would support me. I know if you're watching this, you're probably the kind of person who really likes to do research. So you can check out my website, Andy, ANDYSMITHMN.com, AndySmithMN.com. Thank you so much.
And Candidate Robinson, your opening statement.
My name is John Robinson. I've lived here specifically in Rochester for since 2006 approximately. Before that, I was going to graduate school at New Mexico State University in partial differential equations, worked for the United States Army, and they deployed me to Iraq, where I worked as a supervisor with a team of up to 7 engineers to deploy some of the first IED suppression technology in theater. With this, I have worked with MPs. I've traveled on convoys right through enemy territory, trying to help our soldiers get through the difficulties that they have. Since then, I've come back here and I've opened up a consulting firm where I do work for electronics developing different types of medical sensors. I've developed some radio systems and done some other similar high-tech work for different companies that are startups. What's really interesting is in this particular mode, working for startups, I see people trying to get to that next generation of thing, find ways to stop pain that to date has been just having to have been accepted. The desire, somebody that doesn't necessarily have a business, similar to my opponent in this way, but different because it's of a technical nature, how hard they're willing to try and go forward with their own funds to bring something new to light. With the challenges that we've had over the last several years specifically, I've seen government come in and determine who is essential, who is non-essential, and really get into some aspects that I think, especially as we're getting into the endemic phase, maybe we should have done that previously, but now let's ask questions and determine, is this the way we want to go forward?
Thank you very much. We'll now start with the questions, and Candidate Robinson, you'll go first. And this question relates to election integrity, comes from our online audience. If elected, what will you do to improve election integrity and voter confidence here in Minnesota?
Specifically with election integrity, there's a lot of individuals that really desire to make sure that their vote is heard. There have been questions brought up from the other side with regards to worries about suppression. I think we need to go ahead and bring those forward, talk to some of the leaders of those particular groups and see if we can find a way around those so that we can solidify the system and make sure that our system is as strong as possible so that all people, including those from both our minority communities and all other communities, can be strongly aware that their vote does count and that we can go forward as a society.
Thank you. And Candidate Smith, your answer.
Yeah, thank you for the question. First, very clearly, we do have strong and secure elections here in Minnesota and here in the United States of America. We've had several recounts over the past decade that have shown that we are incredibly accurate with our vote counting, both electronic and mail-in balloting. I think we need to talk about what our values are in voting. And as Americans, our values are that more people should vote. We should want the most amount of people to vote and have their voice heard. And so I am actively against any sort of provisions put in place to limit people being able to vote. That is a core belief that we have as Americans. So to try to limit things like mail-in balloting, to try to limit people who have trouble accessing poll locations on specifically the day we vote is horrific. Also, I'm definitely for making a national holiday or at least a statewide holiday for Election Day, again, so that people who are working jobs where they normally wouldn't get off would be able to vote. We want more people to vote. We don't want to cast doubt on and have less people vote.
Thank you. Candidate Robinson, you have a rebuttal?
Yes, I do. Specifically, within the last several years, there have been both statements from the Clinton campaign and other campaigns from both sides regarding specifically allegations of wrongdoing within the voting system. With regards to whether or not there's even irregularities is less important than the fact that there are issues that have been raised, there are concerns that have been raised, and the ability to make sure that everybody believes that their vote is counted is very important to the stability of our society.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our next question will come from the Post Bulletin. Candidate Smith, you'll respond first.
So whoever wins in this election, you will be a first-term representative, so you won't have a lot of power. But I am wondering, as a statement of values, if you won and you had a magic wand, what would be the first bill that you would seek to pass?
Great question. If you know where that magic wand is, let me know. My first thing would absolutely be to pass through both chambers of the legislature and have the governor sign the Minnesota Health Plan into law. If you know about that, it's a single-payer health system here for Minnesota where everyone would be given access to the health care and to the provider that they want. There would be no more co-pays. There would be no more excessive penalties in our healthcare system. We wouldn't be under insurance companies that run based on profit rather than on the health of their people. And immediately all Minnesotans would be under health insurance. It would help close a lot of the loopholes we currently have in our very broken healthcare system. And it would alleviate a ton of stress on small businesses like my businesses that want to have people work full-time but cannot offer the packages that a 3M or a Target or a Mayo Clinic is able to. And it would alleviate that stress on our bottom line. So from all perspectives, I think the Minnesota Health Plan is fantastic. And knocking door to door with people, this is the thing that I hear time and time again, that they are hurting, that they are confused by health insurance. I can't tell you how many bad health insurance stories I have heard on the trail today. So Minnesota Health Plan.
Thank you. Candidate Robinson, your response.
After taking a look at the financials of the state and going door to door as well, one of my major concerns is inflation, which some people have said, well, that's not inflation. I think what's going on is there are people that are greedy. And interestingly enough, whether it's inflation or whether it's greed, the solution to greed is more companies competing and bringing the price down. And I think the way to do that is to bring our taxes closer to what you see across the country so that we can get more businesses to start up. And as that engine begins to really, really grind, we will have the resources necessary to take a look at other ways of bringing services to Minnesotans, possibly additional health care packages or other things, but we need funds to do that, and the way to get funds is the engine of this economy, which we can get through reduction of taxes.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is coming from the Chamber of Commerce, and candidate Robinson, you will respond first. In light of the ongoing workforce shortage, How will you address this shortage and work to make Minnesota an attractive home for both businesses and employees?
The single biggest thing, again, it's going through the same thing over and over in this particular case, is the tax situation to try to hopefully reduce the cost of living within the state of Minnesota. We also need to take a look at housing specifically. We have some laws specifically regarding there is supposed to be one building code within the state of Minnesota. I want to make sure that that law is understood by the cities so that we can go forward in a way in which we're not sitting at a $470,000 affordable house, and we can get rents and other things in line so that people can come in here and afford to live. Because if they can't afford to live, they're not going to stay here.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Smith, your response.
Could you repeat the question one more time for me?
Yes. In light of the ongoing workforce shortage, how will you address this shortage and work to make Minnesota an attractive home for both businesses and employees?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So first of all, when we talk about work shortage, I think we also need to mention that the state of Minnesota right now is at an all-time low for unemployment. So sometimes when we get talking about the economy, we talk about this as if it's outside of people's experience. But the fact that people are working in jobs and there's a low unemployment is a good thing. Now, worker shortage is a problem, and that's something that we need to work on, and there's a lot of different ways we can work on that. Affordable housing is a great way to do that so that people are coming to our state. Another great way to do this is, as I mentioned before, the Minnesota Health Plan. People would move to Minnesota so that they can have health care that is not tied to their jobs. They would have the freedom to go to jobs that they would like to go, and some of these worker shortages are because small businesses like mine can't compete with those large packages that larger companies can give to new employees. So it would help small businesses and worker shortage in general. I also want to address real quick something my opponent just said about our tax purposes. I've heard this a lot from GOPers recently, that we need to lower taxes to be like the other states around us. However, do we really want to be like Wisconsin in an area like education, where they consistently underperform us? Do we want to be like South Dakota, where they consistently have worse roads and bridges than we do in infrastructure as a whole? The reason that Minnesota is the great state it is because we fund these projects.
Okay, thank you. Any rebuttal on that? Okay, the next question is from the audience. And Candidate Smith, you will go first. It relates to reproductive health. Given the recent Supreme Court ruling regarding Roe versus Wade, state legislatures may be enacting new laws regarding women's reproductive health issues, including access to care and abortion. What measures, if any, do you think the Minnesota legislature should enact regarding women's reproductive health and abortion?
Terribly important question, because this is a scary time where beliefs and rights that we thought we had are being taken away. As a member of the legislature, I will fight always not only to keep what we have as far as reproductive freedom in Minnesota, but to expand that. Even though we are a little haven here in the upper Midwest of a state that still allows that, we still only have 8 providers in the state. So many places in Minnesota, people have to drive hours and hours to get this very simple medical treatment. We still have many restrictions on abortion that we can lift so that people who are in tough, hard situations are able to get the reproductive care that they need. Those decisions are made by those people who are pregnant and their doctors, not by legislatures, not by people in Washington or St. Paul. I also want to say that this is a very personal issue for me. My wife and I have been struggling with infertility, and if you know anything about that, you learn a lot about reproduction and the various parts around that. It's a long story. I would love to tell you in person. You can also go to my website and click on the issues site and click on abortion. I wrote an essay on how I changed my mind. At one point, I would have called myself pro-life, but after listening to so many people in difficult scenarios, I have now gladly say I am pro-choice.
Thank you very much. Candidate Robinson.
I think there are actually several different aspects of this question that are separate issues. One that I would like to bring up specifically is that the state does have a responsibility to make sure that outpatient services are reasonably safe. I think this should be done in a way that is not specific to a specific procedure, but there is something that needs to be across the board. I think we need to talk about it in a way which is respective of the other party's position. But even as far back as Roe versus Wade, it was stated within the decision itself that if there was determined life at any given point beyond that, the right to privacy would be lower than the right to life. That is one of our prime points of the Constitution, the right to life, liberty, and happiness. We need to discuss it. We need to discuss it in a positive way, and we'll see where we can go with that appropriately.
Okay, and Candidate Smith, you have a rebuttal.
I do appreciate that measured response, but I do have to say that the party that my opponent is running for is the party that is talking scarily about this, jailing doctors who are doing this. The women who are doing this are getting fined thousands of dollars. So as many people often say, politics is a team sport. So while I'm happy that my opponent is talking reasonably about that, for the most part, his party, including the gubernatorial candidate, Scott Jensen, has talked about banning it completely without that nuanced approach.
Okay, our next question will come from the Post Bulletin.
We've had a number of mass shootings from Texas to Florida to other states, and yesterday we had a hoax take place where Lord High School shut down, and then a rash of other schools shut down, just speaking to the era in which we live. So gunfire, I was just going to show, so no signs of abating. Do you support any measures to maybe prevent or slow this epidemic of violence?
Which direction is it?
Yeah.
Who starts?
Oh, pardon me, it's Candidate Robinson first.
I think this directly fits actually with the last discussion which I just brought up, which is we as a people have this within our Constitution, this enshrinement of life. And what that says to somebody that is coming into a school, why would they choose to shoot somebody in the first place unless they've just lost touch with their own life? There is a darkness within our society, specifically within this area. With that, I've worked with individuals that are going into situations in which they were getting shot at, where I was getting shot at. And one of the things I will specifically say is when we're working with children and other individuals that are in these situations, it's important to be honest with them. It's important to respect their fears, but not to allow fear to swallow us up, and not for fear to create in us something that we're not. And so within the actions we take, we need to make sure that we watch the rights of the people, and we really try to reach the students and explain to them how life is precious.
Thank you. Candidate Smith.
Yes, I'm very thankful for my opponent's service in a war zone, but I certainly don't want that to be the case in our schools, in our cities, and around our country. I think the definite answer to this is that we need to have common sense gun legislation. And listen, societies like ours, like Australia, like the UK, like Japan, they have just as much trouble with mental health resources, struggling with those things, as well as violent video games, whatever else you want to blame. They have those there, and yet they have less mass shootings in the last 20 years than we have had this year in 2022 in the United States. The answer is it's the guns, and we have to make legislation so that those guns can't get into the hands of the people who will harm other people in our public. There are very clear, common sense ways we can do that, like closing the gun show loop, like making sure that ghost guns aren't a thing that can happen, by banning assault weapons, by making concrete background checks for everyone, making it difficult to get a gun, and that's not going to be impinging on people's rights. People in Australia and Japan and the UK and these places are still free and good citizens, even though they have that limited. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, candidate Robinson, you would like a rebuttal.
A couple of things specifically with that. We specifically, my opponent specifically talked about taking guns away from those that would cause damage. I think we have an endemic within our society of pain within our students. We did not have this in the 1950s. We did not have these numbers. What has changed? You can take the guns away from students. Unfortunately, they will find other ways to attack. Within overseas, they could not attack us with guns because, okay.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to relate to taxes, and candidate Smith, you will go first. The 2022 Minnesota Legislature had a tax bill that included things such as dropping income taxes on Social Security, a modest cut to income tax rates, an expansion of the renter's credit, and a major increase in funding streams for local government. What would you do to help moderate the tax burden on Minnesotans? And this is an in-person question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. Just a reminder that that 2020 tax bill was, for the most part, bipartisan, as bipartisan bills usually are. It didn't pass because of, at the last minute, the GOP-controlled Senate pulled out of those negotiations. So we need to remember that. But I want to go on and actually answer that specific question about taxes. We do need to make sure that Minnesotans can live, that they are, of course, paying their fair share, but everyone is paying their fair share. And that's what I want to talk about. The way we relieve tax burdens on middle class and working class families is to make sure that the upper class, the richer 90%, richer 10% of our society are paying their fair share, that corporations are paying their fair share and are not finding loopholes so that we can fund things like our education, like our roads, our bridges, our healthcare system without having to overly tax the middle class and the working families. So that's what we need to focus on as a legislature, not raising taxes on middle classes, but making sure that those who aren't currently paying their fair share do.
Thank you. And candidate Robinson, your response.
I think specifically within the question that you brought up were several very important issues. When we talk about Social Security tax specifically, we're talking about individuals that are on a limited income. And I would absolutely support that due to the fact that especially as we see price hikes in food and in other basic areas, those that are on those limited incomes are going to be very, very stressed. With regards to taxes across the board, specifically this discussion of making sure that certain individuals or certain groups pay their fair share, we've heard this before, and typically, and unfortunately, it does affect other individuals. Individuals that are using funds that are part of a business or other structure, when they are taxed additionally, that means that they have less funds for employees. Having run a business, I specifically have seen this, and we need to make sure that we don't demonize those that create the engine, that give us the jobs, that help us to have the prosperity we want.
Thank you. No rebuttal. Okay, the next question, candidate Robinson, you will respond first, and it relates to another action from last year's legislative session relating to the surplus. It's a question both the members of the Chamber of Commerce and our audience here would like answered. And if elected, what priorities do you have for the $9 billion surplus? How would you work with others in the legislature to allocate these funds? And help to work on preventing the recession that might be coming?
Specifically on this, the first thing that we got from the last question, I think, is a very good place to start. Specifically cutting Social Security, a good part of that fund needs to go back due to the inflation and due to the other hardship caused by the pandemic that we're now coming out of. Beyond this, as I pointed to at the very opening, I want to see the overall taxes come down so that we can try to get our economy going. There's plenty of things that we need to start making, specifically with regards to the semiconductor industry, trying to bring specifically our supply chain here so that we can maintain security at home, both national security and job security. I think we can start with exactly that and get a good bit of that back for the short run for helping people in need now.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Smith.
This surplus is an opportunity, and I think it's an exciting opportunity. Why do we have government in the first place? It's so that we can achieve and protect things together collectively that we can't do on an individual basis. And with this money, we can do a lot of very exciting things that would help our society that we can't do individually, but we can do collectively as a society. I mentioned before the Minnesota Health Plan, I think, would be massive. Helping people now, if you go look at your pay stub and look how much money was taken out to be given to a for-profit health care insurance company. Anywhere from 10 to 40% of your paycheck. Imagine if that was going into your pocket instead of into Aetna or Blue Crosses. On top of that, we can have better roads. We can create a better infrastructure so that we are ready for the green energy revolution that we are going to have a better tomorrow for my generation and for your kids. We can have #1 quality schools in the entire nation where teachers don't have to work part-time jobs. We don't have to do drives so that they can have basic school supplies in their classrooms. We can do amazing things with that $9 billion in our state of Minnesota if we work together and get that done. And that is what I'm going to do in the legislature next year.
Okay, thank you. And Candidate Robinson, you have a rebuttal?
Got 3 quick points. First quick point, if we add new things that we are going to be paying for, then next time we have to actually come around and have a budget, we're now going to have to increase taxes. A lot of the funds from the excess is specifically due to government program. Second thing, if we do not get our economy going, then we will not see growth in the corpus of the insurance companies' money. And that means they're going to have to increase rates. Insurance companies are specifically regulated with respect to.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to relate to wages, and it comes from our in-person audience here. Should high school students working a summer job be paid a living wage? What would you consider a living wage?
Who's first on that?
I'm sorry, Candidate Smith, you're going first.
Absolutely not. We pay for the job that is done, not based on the age of the worker. That's why we have a minimum wage. That's why the labor movement has worked so hard to make that the case throughout the history of the U.S. and the world. So I would certainly not want to do that. A living wage, I think, now starts at $15 an hour, and we need to have a plan for that to increase steadily over the next couple of months. We need to make sure that those people who are working at jobs are able to pay for their livelihood, so they can pay their rent bill, so that they can pay for basic food, so that they can raise a family on this. And you just simply cannot do that on $10.33 an hour. And by the way, much less if in things like a barista or a waitress or a hostess, you're getting tipped. I think you can go down to almost $7 and change. So we need to absolutely look out for our workers, allow them to unionize, allow them to organize with a union so that they can get better wages and be able to live life like they want to do and thrive where they are.
Okay, thank you. And Candidates Robinson, your response.
We absolutely want to have decent wages in the state of Minnesota. Specifically, the best way to get those wages is to have them organically driven by need. The workers tend to have greater respect from their employers if they know that the individual can leave and go to another place. The other thing that I absolutely want to touch base on is historically one of the ways that we got people to have time with jobs was by having entry-level jobs. And if we completely wipe out those entry-level jobs, getting people into the workforce to begin with so that they can have a career, which by its very nature will have higher wages than even the $15 an hour job, we're asking to cause trouble there. So that it needs to be a balanced approach, specifically for just opening up and getting people the experience they need so that they can engage additional jobs in the future. So we need balance there.
Okay, thank you. And there's a rebuttal from candidate Smith.
Merely to say that a lot of these entry-level jobs are normally young people who are saving money for college. It's normally people who are working part-time because they are their parents or they're going to school. These are people who need the money just as much as those people who have full-time jobs, even though they're not able to get that same time. I started a business in 2019, started paying my employees $15 an hour, and you know what? It was really hard. We didn't really have the money to do that immediately, but we thought that it was worthwhile. People are more worthwhile than businesses, and so we were willing to take that risk, and it worked out.
Thank you. Our next question is going to come from the Post Bulletin, and candidate Robinson, you'll have the first response.
Inflation remains at sort of a four-decade high. Just today, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates 0.75, indicating how serious this problem is. And I know that these issues are often national, if not global in nature, but do you see anything that you can do as a state legislator to soften the blow, to protect people from these increasing costs?
Could you, as candidate Robinson, you're responding first.
This is exactly what I was bringing forward with regards to the surplus that we have. We have this little ouch that's going on right now. And again, going back to what I was talking about before, trying to get our engine going. Specifically, you have supply and you have demand. You do not get rid of inflation by adding more dollars. You need to have production. You need things that can be bought by that money, and you need an engine running to make that happen. So that is exactly what I've been discussing. It also supports the lowering of costs with insurance because their corpus is in stocks, bonds, and in that engine. And that's how they generate funds to help us with those needs that come out of nowhere. So yes, yes, and yes.
Okay. Candidate Smith, your response.
Sure. I think when we talk about inflation being at a four-decade high, we need to remember that we're coming off of a century pandemic, right? A once-in-a-century pandemic that we weren't prepared for, and that, in my opinion, we did not have good national leadership when it started, and put us in a tough place. And we're still recovering from that. And yes, there are some bad indicators, like we said, with inflation, with interest rate going up. There are also some good ones. Gas prices have been coming down. Home prices have started to decrease a little bit. And so we don't know what the future is going to hold. And I think that's important to say. Secondly, to get to the question about, as a legislature, what can we do to soften the blow? There's a lot of things we can do. I already mentioned a couple of them with helping provide health care. There are programs we can do where if we do raise the minimum wage, we can help small businesses for a couple of months, fill in the gap between the current minimum wage and the minimum wage as it could be. We can make transportation easier and more free, especially in our major cities. So there's things we can do to help lighten the load on people, even down to, as Governor Walz floated, giving one-time checks to help people make it through that average of $400 more expensive for necessary needs. So there's a lot of things we can do.
Okay, thank you. The next question is going to relate to climate change. As our state representative, how would you address the changing climate and move Minnesota toward a more sustainable future? Will history call you a climate champion? And candidate Smith, you'll go first.
Yeah, to answer specifically, aggressively is how I would attack that problem. I was born in 1991. I'm 31 years old. For my entire lifetime, we have known, for the most part, scientific agreement that humans we are causing global warming, climate change, that the oceans are warming and will cause catastrophic change to our environment if we don't act. And for the most part, we have not acted. Even things like the Paris Climate Accords in 2016 were rolled back. So we have to act now. We have to act swiftly. We might talk about the cost of building a new green infrastructure and how hard that is going to be. It is going to be hard, I will not lie to you. However, the consequences and the cost of not doing that are too high for us not to go for that. We need to invest heavily as a state into solar, into wind energy, as perhaps a stopgap, into nuclear energy, and that has to be done yesterday, but we need to get a move on it as fast as we can and do that in a strong way. It's why, my belief in this is why the Sierra Club has endorsed me, why the Friends of the Boundary Waters endorsed me, because they recognize that I will be, as that question stated, a climate champion for Minnesota.
Thank you. And candidate Robinson, your response.
Well, a little bit about my background. My dad is an ecologist, one of the first ecologists from Oregon State University. I've done extensive work up and down the West Coast, going with him, walking in different places and seeing what's going on. He was one of the first individuals to determine acid rain in Texas due to the burning of lignite. Specifically with regards to climate change, one thing I will say is if we do not have the metal to put up the infrastructure necessary to put the electricity from one place to another, we can't do it. And if we push it out to China, that's why now we have mercury in every single creek west of the Great Divide, is because they burn coal, it goes up into the jet stream, and it rains down on our cities and on our creeks. We need to be aware that if we just make things go away, they don't go away. And that is not moral and is not ethical. And so while we're having the discussion, we need to be sure that we take a look at the entire scope of what we're talking about and what it's going to do to our entire planet, and not just do a half gap that looks good and then walk away. Additionally, expensive energy disproportionately affects the poor, and we need to make sure that we don't leave them behind.
Thank you. The next question relates to the ERA, and candidate Robinson, you'll respond first. Would you support a state equal rights amendment such as exists in 26 other states, including Alaska, Iowa, Nebraska, and Texas? And this is from somebody in the audience. So candidate Robinson, your response first.
The ERA, as it stands, actually refers to about 3 different pieces of legislation. One's at the federal level, there's another one at the state level, and the one at the federal level requires legislation at the state level, and there's questions regarding whether or not it would still be valid due to the fact that it had an expiration on it. Then we have the state one, it has different material in it. Each one is a little bit different. It has different impacts, and we need to be very careful. So I'm actually going to just mention there's complexity there.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Smith.
Yes, I would support it. The ERA states simply that there should not be any discrimination based on sex, and I agree on that, and so I think we should have it in the Minnesota Constitution, and would continue to support that being in the United States Constitution, where Minnesota has already accepted that amendment, even though it is not currently in action. So would support both.
Okay, thank you. Candidate Smith, you'll respond first to this question regarding or relating to education. Minnesota currently has no legal maximum length of time for school children to ride buses to school. Would you be in favor of imposing a limit? If so, would you increase school funding to cover the costs? And this is from a person in the audience.
What was the wording at the beginning there? Legal maximum?
Yes. Would you support a legal maximum length of time for students to ride buses to school?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure exactly what that is confirming to. I would imagine it's rural schooling and making sure that buses are able to bring children to their the closest public school available. Obviously, I think every child, no matter where they are in the state, should have easy access to a classroom. So I wouldn't want to put any maximum on that ability for them to go. And of course, yes, we would like to fund that programs and ability for buses to bring children to schools. And since we're talking about education, and I have one more minute, I will say that we need to continue to fund our Minnesota schools, and we need to fund them better than we have, including the cross-subsidy, which allows for federal mandated special education and English as a second language courses to be covered. We've never funded that fully, as well as raising the salary for teachers in our schools. We should be paying the teachers the highest possible amount because they do an amazing job preparing our next generation. We don't want to be a race to the bottom with our states next to us and treating workers worse and our teachers worse. We need to teach them better, and that will attract people to our place. Again, coming back to the worker shortage that we talked about earlier, people are attracted by better wages, better benefits, and that's what we should give them.
Thank you. And Candidate Robinson, your response.
Interestingly enough, I know exactly what this question is concerning. My son gets off at 2:25 from high school, and he doesn't get home till about 4:30, almost 5 o'clock, somewhere in there. We're not rural, last time I checked, but it is an issue. At the same time, I am aware specifically, I could see how there could be greater distance as you go into rural communities. Whether or not we want to do a straight maximum or whether we want to try to take in the needs of the different areas so that based upon the ability of the bus to transverse the area, we somehow come out with an equitable way of getting students to where they need to go. I think that's absolutely reasonable. The exact details, I would want to hear from people. I would want to maintain transparency, and I would want to move forward as a society. Specifically, something that kicked my ear with my opponent, he said that people want greater wages. I disagree. People want greater value. If we end up with money that's worthless, nobody's going to want it.
Okay, thank you. Our C candidate Smith would like a rebuttal. Please go ahead.
I think that is definitely a bad faith argument. I think if we asked everyone in this room if you would like a small raise at your job, I think you would say yes. And specifically, what I was referencing is more pay for teachers and for public workers who are underpaid. I don't think anyone would question that. Many of our teachers are doing a part-time job on the side to a job that already is over full-time. If you've ever worked as a teacher, I have, and made $38,000 a year doing it. So I don't think there's a problem of us inflating dollars past being worthwhile.
Thank you. The next question is going to come from the Post Bulletin, and candidate Robinson, you will respond first.
So the league has asked us to keep our questions forward-looking, but I'm going to just go backward a little bit here. So a common complaint against, well, let's just say Governor Walz used his emergency powers. Some say that to protect us from the virus. Some say that he abused it, and they were calling him autocratic. The nature of these emergency powers may be looked at in the future legislature in terms of curbing it, reforming it. Do you think the governor abused it, and do you want to change it, or do you agree with what he did with it?
Okay, and candidate Robinson.
I have specific concerns about the determination of the value of businesses. This is something that bothers me greatly. It also bothers me greatly that we determined that religious services were non-essential. We have different values among different people, and they can respectfully argue and disagree. That's part of our great tradition. With regards to that discussion, I think it is appropriate that we have these discussions. We've never been through something quite like this. Maybe it was good to have those emergency powers. Now we can talk as a society to determine what are our values going forward, and should the government decide how to gradate us and choose which groups go to work, which groups don't, and other kind of value-oriented decisions, which I generally question, I guess would be the best way to put it.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, your rebuttal, candidate
No,
Smith?
that's fine. The reason we have something like an emergency powers in the executive is in an extreme situation that is largely unknown where things have to happen fast. And often in those scenarios, in those crisis scenarios, mistakes are made because it's a very hard job to be able to make those tough decisions. For the most part, I agree with the decisions Governor Walz made in a very difficult situation, restraining certain things. I mean, my business was forced to close down for, I believe, 6 weeks for our first closure, and then 3 weeks in the other one. And that was hard. It was really hard. But again, it was a terrifying time that we didn't know. So I think we can sit here now in 2022 and look back and, of course, say there are particular moments where maybe we wouldn't make that decision. We wouldn't make that. But I am happy that Governor Walz was in the position that he was. I think he did much better than some other governors around our country. And I will proudly vote for him when I go to the polls and reelect him this campaign season.
Okay, thank you. So this closes the question portion of our forum, and we are moving now to our closing statements by the candidates. And candidate Robinson, you will go first.
One of the major things that basically underline the type of government that I see as best is one that does not seek to tell the people, for the most part, what to do, but tries to discuss with them, give them the relevant information, allow them the most freedom that they have to also participate in making decisions with the money that they have earned themselves, and to be an enabler and to work side by side. When you use mandates, you tend to reduce social trust, which is an unfortunate side effect. It is not just with this society, but as we go back in history, this is an issue that pops up. And I desire a government and a society where we can try to discuss civilly, and we as adults can make our own decisions, and with those decisions, understand that there are consequences with them. I would like you to consider my candidacy, and this is one of the major differences between it. We have options.
Thank you. Candidate Smith, your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you again for taking place and coming here this evening. Since my opponent brought up a great point about government, I want to say what I think about government. I think, as Abraham Lincoln would say, we want a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. There isn't a war between the government and the people. We are the government. As I said earlier, we can come together and fix problems that we couldn't fix on our own. I can't fix the healthcare crisis on my own. You can't fix our education system on your own. Together, we have to do that by electing representatives that will fight for us and by working towards those larger solutions. And that's what I will do in St. Paul, looking for those solutions and not creating a area of competition. I feel often that MAGA Republicans are trying to pit us against each other. There has to be winners and there has to be losers. But no, we are a community that together we can fix these things. We can be united to create a better society, a better community, and a better Minnesota where everyone can thrive in their chosen life. And they have the tools to succeed where they want to succeed. That's the Minnesota I want to create. That's the Minnesota I want you to vote for this November 8th, and I hope you will. Thank you again for coming out.
Okay, and I would like to thank you, candidates. You've undertaken an awesome responsibility here, and we appreciate the energy and effort that you're putting into participating in this democratic process. I would like to remind the audience again that the views expressed in the forum tonight are those of the candidates and not those of League of Women Voters Rochester or any of our sponsors, the Post Bulletin, the Chamber of Commerce, or the Rochester Public Library. I also want to thank our partners because this could not have happened without their effort and their support. So remember that November 8th is Election Day, but also important is that early voting in Minnesota starts tomorrow. And remember, if you vote early and you change your mind, there is a process that you can change your ballot. You have to go to votesminnesota.org for more information on that particular process. So again, please remember to vote however you choose to do that. If you have a question about where your polling place is, because they have changed this year, if you voted in the primary, you already know that. And there are sample ballots that you can find either at vote411.org or at minvotes.org. That's MNVOTES.org. To see this forum again, you can access it on the websites of either the League of Women Voters Rochester or the Rochester Public Library. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for your participation and your courtesy. Good night, everybody.